purpose of this video is to highlight dangers that exist during straddle operation. These include dangers to personnel and equipment in the area and also to straddle drivers. Straddle carriers are the main tools used to transport containers around the port. Each straddle weighs approximately 60 tonnes and is capable of carrying up to 50 tonnes. Because of their size and weight, these machines have the potential to cause significant damage or injury in the event of an accident. It's important, therefore, that all staff working in the container area have an awareness of the dangers present during their operation. Before starting a drive, make sure you're wearing the correct PPE clothing. You'll need to pass through a working area to reach the straddle park-up area, so you must be visible at all times. Ensure your clothing doesn't allow for skin contact against the seat. Also, hoodies are not permitted while driving as they restrict your peripheral vision. Don't forget to attend the toolbox talk at the start of your shift or read the safety bulletin so you're aware of any hazards in the yard during the shift. Perform a visual check to make sure the straddle is fit for operation. Check the condition of the tyres for damage. Make sure hydraulic lines are secure with no leaks or damage, all engine doors are secure and there is no damage to the structure of the machine. Check the fire extinguishers are present at the bottom of the straddle and also in the cab when you get there. Make sure the extinguisher dial is pointing to the green zone. Check underneath the straddle for any fluid leaks. If you encounter any problems, complete a car report so the issue can be fixed. Tag the machine out if required. Do not use the straddle if there is a tag attached to the ladder. When climbing the straddle ladder, remember to maintain 3 points of contact at all times. Make sure there are no loose objects lying about the cabin, especially on the floor. Although the straddle cab is placed 10 metres high, there are still factors that affect the visibility that a driver has. The straddle legs are the biggest problem when it comes to visibility, especially when driving legs first. The legs block a significant portion of the view of oncoming traffic, and care must be taken when turning, as other straddles can easily be in this blind spot. The area behind the driver is also a blind spot. This area is difficult to check without turning around in the seat and is a hazard. The area around the straddle wheels contains a number of blind spots due to the legs and spreader. Be very cautious when working anywhere near the base of a straddle and never assume that a driver knows you're there. Straddle driving can sometimes contribute to aches and pains due to the side-on driving position. To avoid sore neck, back, shoulders or wrists, adjust your seat and controls to a comfortable position when you first get into the straddle. The seat can be adjusted in a number of ways, and most straddles have steering wheels that offer both tilt and reach adjustment. Adjust your posture in the seat and practice stretches every 10 to 15 minutes to avoid discomfort. Don't forget to fasten your seatbelt at the start of every drive and be aware of where the emergency stop button is for your machine. Kalmar machines have emergency stop buttons at these locations. There is an engine stop button beside the joystick and also a spreader, expand, retract stop button. Before leaving the park-up area, check that your radio is set to channel 3 and advise control that you're starting a new drive. This is important so that you can be told of any new hazards in the yard. Look carefully for straddles approaching from the right when starting your drive. Other straddles may also be pulling out and will be approaching from your blind spot. Keep a lookout for people on the ground when leaving the straddle park-up area. Remember to sound the horn and move off slowly. This is especially true if the truck lanes are being used for driver changeovers. Exercise extreme caution when entering and leaving these areas. Once moving gently, check the brakes to get a feel for their operation. Each straddle will drive slightly differently, so become familiar with the machine when starting your drive. When the container yard is busy, there will be a number of straddles operating at once, and congestion can be a problem. Take care in this situation and keep a good lookout for other machines. Slow down in busy areas and obey the driving rules, but be prepared to slow and stop at all times. Take care when working around containers that are over width or over height. The straddle may not be wide enough to clear an over width load, and the normal spreader height marks may not provide sufficient height clearance. This is especially true when working with the over height gear. The lower bar can easily damage cargo that extends beyond the top of an open top container, so work carefully when using this equipment. When loading or discharging swing lift trucks, you may need to seek assistance to ensure clearance of the container over the swing lift. The highest swing lift trucks can't be loaded using the over height gear. If you're operating a straddle with preset height buttons, make sure you use the joystick and not the preset height buttons. Select anything less than too high with the preset buttons means the load will make contact with the ground and cause significant damage. Be aware of the load the straddle is carrying and also how you're driving the machine. A tight turning radius, high speed and a load positioned high will all contribute to instability. Electronics in the straddle will continuously monitor these factors and sound an alarm when stability is significantly reduced. If you hear this alarm, slow down, but avoid hard braking. Avoid sharp turns and lower the height of the spreader. The spreader should be set to the 1 high mark when driving around the yard. Be aware of and follow the driving rules for straddles. They'll help to maintain a smooth flow of traffic around the container yard and minimise danger to users. Even if you have the right of way, slow down and prepare to stop. Allow other straddles time to complete their movements and drive in a courteous manner. There are several factors that determine the safe manoeuvring of the straddle. They include factors such as congestion, other machinery, surface conditions, weather, load weight, height and type. Also, think about your own approach to driving. Are you in the right frame of mind? Exercise patience and remember to communicate with other drivers when necessary. The container yard is not a racetrack, and having a relaxed approach and good etiquette is one of the key factors in preventing accidents. There are several walkways around the container yard. Never drive over these under any circumstances. The main access path to the wharf cuts through the middle of the yard and can be busy at times. Although straddles have the right of way, be aware of pedestrians crossing in this area. Be aware of the walkways along the edge of the wharf. These are for pedestrian use only and should never be driven on. Be cautious in any area where there may be people working or flashing lights are indicating a hazard. Be prepared to slow down and stop at all times, even though straddles have the right of way over other traffic in the container yard. If other vehicles need to enter the container yard, Control will ask all straddles to stop for a short time. Be sure to come to a complete stop until advised by Control that it's clear to move again. The reefer areas frequently have men working in them and will be off limits to straddles. If the straddle's screen displays this men working message, you must stay out of that area and wait until it is clear. There are warning lights that will be flashing if there are workers in the area. You must make sure that you check these lights before entering any area where reefers are stored. These warning lights are the official signal that there are people working in the area. The on-screen message is for your convenience only. Entering a reefer area when the lights are on is a serious risk to personnel on the ground. There are double yellow lines around the reefer areas. These are a reminder that you're entering a reefer area. The steel plates covering the reefer pits are not designed to take the weight of a straddle. Avoid driving over these. If you're picking up a reefer, check that it's unplugged and that the number on the container matches the one on your screen. There are several dedicated blocking containers around the yard. These are used for safety purposes and should never be moved unless instructed by Control. In the event of a breakdown, stop and notify Control of the situation on Channel 3. Stay with the machine and await further instructions. If you're involved in an accident or collision, remain stationary. Do not try and separate any machinery that is contacted. Inform control and wait for the workshop to inspect your machine before moving. When parking the straddle at the end of the shift, use only the designated areas. Make sure you park with a cab facing north. This means that the driver isn't exposed to passing straddle traffic when using the ladder. If parking in lanes 6 or 7, keep your cab to the west. Lanes 1 to 5, keep cabs to the north. When refuelling, the cab will need to face east. If you need to take a straddle to the workshop, make sure that they know you're coming. Ask control to call ahead and let them know. Approach the workshop area very slowly with your cab to the east and watch for someone to give you directions. Don't cross the double yellow lines unless instructed. When parked, make sure the parking brake is on and the spreader is set to 20 foot. If left at 40 foot, the spreader will hang over the roadway and is very difficult to see for any passing straddles. The hill block at the eastern end of the terminal should be entered and exited from the west only, as it backs onto CFS area, which is out of bounds to straddles. The MTX area is used to manage the flow of empty containers into and out of the terminal and lies at the eastern end of the yard. As you enter the MTX area, switch to channel 13 in case the MTX staff need to communicate with you. When you leave the area, return to channel 3. If you need to contact control while using the MTX, you must exit the area and change to channel 3. When ready, change back to channel 13 and re-enter the MTX. Straddles and forklifts are not to use the MTX at the same time, as the risk of collision is too great. If a forklift enters the area while you're there, remain stationary and contact them on channel 13. When taking empty containers to the MTX, drop them on the north side of the area and work across to the south. When picking up containers, start from the south side and work north. Care is needed when twin lifting containers. The 4 centre pins can be lowered before or after the spreader is lowered onto the containers, but be sure that all pins have locked successfully. It's possible for only the pins at the end of the spreader to lock, meaning the inside ends of the containers will be unsupported. This will cause damage to the straddle and is especially dangerous if lifting from a truck. Be aware that when lifting a 40-foot flat rack, the straddle will be looking for contact with the containers beneath the centre pins. This is a safety feature and must be overridden in order to lift the flat rack. Once the spreader is resting on the flat rack, press the twist locks up button. The end twist locks will close and the flat rack can be lifted. Trucks follow a set process when exchanging containers at the port. Let's look through the process to help identify hazards. After arriving at the container terminal and processing paperwork, trucks are called through the gate when their number is displayed on the board. Drivers should have unlocked their twist locks before entering the yard. Trucks must stop before entering the container yard. Straddles have the right of way at all times, but be prepared to slow down and stop if necessary. This can be a very busy area with many vehicles moving at once. Each truck will pull into the designated lane for loading or unloading. Allow the driver to reach the lane before approaching the truck. Don't tail the truck onto the lane. Allow it to come to a stop and the driver to exit the vehicle and reach the marked safe zone. Don't drive over the truck unless the driver is clear of the vehicle and standing in the safe zone. Approach the truck slowly and be aware of the presence of swing lifts on some trucks. These extend quite high in some cases and present a collision hazard if you don't raise your container high enough. Before entering a lane, always check the following. Check the container number matches the one on your screen. Check that your spreader is centered. Check that your spreader is at the correct height. Check that the truck driver is in the designated safe zone. Use the end of your spreader as a guide to position the straddle. If the edge of the spreader lines up with the edge of the truck or container, you'll have sufficient room. However, make sure you center your spreader before using this method. The area where truck loading takes place is on a slight slope towards the wharf. Be aware of this when over a truck and be careful the straddle and container don't roll back and hit a swing lift. Once a container has been loaded onto a truck, the driver will perform a visual check to make sure it is sitting correctly. Once you receive confirmation from the driver that the container is in place, you can carefully lift the spreader. When lifting a container off of a truck, don't snatch the load. Lift gently in case a twist lock has failed to release properly. The straddle will easily lift a truck off the ground and could result in significant damage. If you're operating one of the straddles with preset height buttons, use the joystick and not the auto height buttons. Truck drivers are required to fasten twist locks on their loads before leaving the container area. Once a container has been loaded on a truck, the driver will walk around his vehicle and fasten the load. This exposes him to a straddle entering or leaving the adjacent lane. Always be extremely cautious when coming onto or off of a truck lane. Drive slowly and keep a lookout for personnel on the ground, as well as other straddles and trucks. Be sure to check your blind spots as you leave a truck lane, and remember that lanes 6 and 7 give way to lanes 1 to 5. Take care when moving between two lanes. Performing a U-turn to move between lanes means you'll be in the blind spot of other straddles. The safest method is to completely back off the truck and then approach the new lane. Before approaching the rail line, make sure your radio is set to channel 1 so you can communicate with a twist locks operator. They can pass you useful information like the size of your next container or hazards on the rail line such as generators. The direction of travel along the rail line is always west to east, and travelling legs first. Always follow this pattern to ease congestion with other straddles. When travelling down the rail line, it's recommended to reduce your speed to around half. This will make it easier to drive down the line and reduce the risk of contacting the curbing. Check that your spreader is high enough to clear containers on the rail wagon. If the wagon is empty, be aware that there are sometimes generators that also need to be cleared. When driving onto the rail line, use the end of your spreader as a guide to position the straddle. If the edge of the spreader lines up with the edge of the lane, you will have sufficient room. However, make sure you centre your spreader before using this method. One of the biggest hazards when driving a straddle down the rail line is inattention. Take care when lining the machine up with the rail siding and approach slowly. Make sure the machine is stationary before attempting to input a container number. Even if the twist locks operator gives you the number before you arrive, do not enter it until you're stationary. Be aware of personnel on the ground who are operating the wagon's twist locks. Don't lose focus on the straddle's position in relation to the rail line, but do exercise caution and use a low speed around this person's area of work. Once you arrive at your container, be sure you come to a complete stop before attempting to enter the container number. Do not attempt to lift or land a container unless you're under direct instruction from the twist locks operator and have established radio contact with them. Latch onto the container and lift very slowly as directed by the twist locks operator. If you're instructed to stop lifting the container, then stop immediately. Always be prepared to stop lifting. If the wagon twist locks have not disengaged correctly, there is a risk of derailing the wagon. The twist locks operator will indicate when your container is high enough to proceed. If there is a wagon derailment, follow the instructions of the twist locks operator or control. When leaving the rail line, perform a U-turn to head back into the container yard and switch your radio back to channel 3. Make sure you do a U-turn at the end of the rail line and do not drive under the RTG as there is a high risk of hitting it. The rail line has a set of gates approximately halfway down the line. These are normally closed to straddles to allow traffic access to the workshop area. When rail operations are underway, these gates are open to allow straddles access along the rail line and traffic is prevented from crossing the rail line. Personnel will be stationed at the gates to control traffic and allow it to cross the rail line when clear. Remain on channel 1 at all times when over the rail line. When you come onto the rail line, check that this gate is open and is clear to proceed. The end of the rail line can be a congested area. Straddles exiting the rail line, entering and exiting the MTX area, refueling and accessing the MAF area all use this space, so it's important to be aware of who has the right of way. Straddles coming off of the rail line have the right of way over all other traffic. Straddles leaving the MTX area give way to rail. Straddles entering the MTX area must give way to rail straddles and those leaving the MTX area. Straddles using the wash bay or fuel bay give way to everyone else. There is a 5 km/h speed limit when passing the fuel bay. When driving around the container yard, there are important rules to follow, just like when driving on the road. Obey the give way signs painted on the roadways and remember to keep a lookout at all times for other straddles. In some situations, straddles may need to be on the wrong side of a roadway if lining up to go into a row. Take care in these situations and allow the other machine room to move. When operating around the truck lanes, give way to straddles entering and leaving the truck lanes. Straddles using lanes 6 and 7 should give way to those using lanes 1 to 5. Straddles using the slot drain have the right of way over the roadways. Be careful when pulling into the slot drain that there are no straddles approaching and pay special attention to your blind spots. Take extra care when working at night, as approaching straddles can often be very difficult to see. When travelling down the slot drain, make sure you keep to the left. There is sufficient room for 2 straddles to pass each other as long as your wheels are just to the left of the yellow line on the roadway. Don't cut corners, and remember that you should remain on the left at all times, even after turning a corner. The exception to this is when you need to line a straddle up to enter a row. Take corners at a speed that allows you to end up on the left-hand side. Remember to maintain a safe distance between straddles. At least 2 straddle lengths when travelling down the slot drain. Turning straddles can slow quickly, and if you're too close, there's a danger of collision. Take care when leaving the slot drain that the swing of the straddle doesn't cause a collision. When travelling legs first, the cab will swing out into the path of an oncoming straddle with potentially disastrous results. Let any oncoming straddles pass safely before turning out of the slot drain. During loading and discharging from the ship, there are some extra things to be aware of. When moving from the container yard onto the wharf, remember to change radio channels. Each crane uses a separate channel, and it's important to be on the correct one so you can receive any instructions from the foreman on board the vessel and hear the numbers of containers as they're being unloaded. Make sure you respond to all messages given to you. This ensures efficient communication and that any safety messages have been received. Remember to change back to the control channel when leaving the wharf area. When heading to the wharf, take time to see which roadways other straddles are using. Usually there will be an entry and exit that offers the most efficient wharf access. Try and stick to this pattern to maintain a smooth workflow for all straddles. Straddles leaving the wharf have right of way over those coming onto it. Often access onto the wharf can be limited due to other cranes, straddles, or the lids from the ship. These factors are always changing, so be constantly aware of your surroundings. Be conscious of your position when on the wharf. When picking up or dropping a container, you'll need to be in lane 2, but otherwise try and stay in lane 1. This allows more room for straddles entering and exiting the crane area. The lanes are marked out to provide enough space for all lanes to be used at once, and quite often containers will be placed in lanes 1 and 2 at the same time. Be aware of the position of the crane's legs if you're working in lanes 1 or 3. Make sure you're well clear of the legs before turning, or there's a chance of colliding with the crane. The clearance between straddles and the crane is quite small, so move very slowly and be very careful. When entering the lanes under the crane, use the end of your spreader as a guide to position the straddle. If the edge of the spreader lines up with the edge of the lane, you will have sufficient room. However, make sure you centre your spreader before using this method. Also check that your spreader is set high enough to clear the container. Be aware of the position of the crane spreader when working around the crane. Don't drive beneath the crane until the spreader is well clear. If the crane is moving back over the ship and has to stop quickly, there's a danger of the spreader swinging back over the lanes and into a straddle. Occasionally, you may be asked to move the gear bins on the wharf that contain the ship's twist locks. Take care when moving onto the bins, as you'll be working very close to the crane. Also, sound the straddle's horn when moving onto and off the bins to alert personnel on the wharf who should remain in the crane's gondola during the move. In the event of an emergency, an alarm will sound over the straddle's radio. If the alarm is given, all straddles are to stop immediately, switch to channel 3 and await further instruction from control. By observing some basic rules, you can help to ensure that you and your workmates enjoy a safe working environment and that hazards are minimised. Remember the 10 STEPS rules. Wear PPE gear. Keep to designated walkways. Report all incidents in a timely manner. Report all hazards and unsafe practices. No cell phones. Don't work under the influence of drugs or alcohol. Follow procedures. No shortcuts. Know what to do in an emergency. Use the right tools for the job. Use correct manual handling lifting methods. If you think there's something in your work area that is unsafe, approach your foreman to get it fixed. The lever straddles used in the terminal are newer diesel electric models. There are a few things to look out for when driving these machines. These straddles have their diesel engines started at ground level. Just press the green button to start the straddle. The red button is used to stop it. When climbing the ladder, be careful of the cab door. If it's not fully closed, the edge of the door can protrude over the access way, catching your back or shoulder. When exiting the cab, be sure to close the door completely so this doesn't happen to the next driver. Note the fire extinguisher is in a different location on these machines, outside the door on the platform. The straddle can be operated with the door open or closed, but be sure to latch it in the chosen position so it doesn't slide. If not secured, it can slide while you're driving, potentially breaking the door glass. These straddles are equipped with automatic height buttons. When you press one of the 5 buttons, the spreader will automatically travel to that height. This can be cancelled by simply moving the joystick. The selected height is shown on the light bar by the flashing light. This light turns solid once the height is reached. Take care not to select the 1 high mark when using the overheight gear. The overheight gear takes up the same height as a container, and selecting this height will cause the container being carried to come into contact with the ground, damaging the equipment. Select the 2 high mark when carrying a container with the overheight gear. Don't use the height presets for landing the spreader or a container. The preset heights are only approximate, and manual control is required for these operations. There is a camera in the cab of these straddles that gives the driver a view when travelling legs first. This camera should be used to double check the position of the crane spreader when travelling legs first underneath the crane. Take time to get used to the handling characteristics when first driving these machines. They use a different steering and braking system that can take some time to get used to. Remember, there are information cards in the cab that you can use if you get stuck. Take some time to read these and make use of them when necessary. When finishing a drive, turn off the electric crane using the switch in the cab. Failure to do so will result in a flat battery. Remember to close the door completely so that the next driver doesn't hurt themselves. Be conscious of your spreader height. Having the spreader set to the incorrect height is one of the biggest causes of collisions in the terminal. Constantly check the height of your spreader as you're driving, especially when you enter a row. Even if you're using a straddle with the preset height buttons, always be aware of where your spreader is and how high it needs to be. When entering rows, try and have the straddle as straight as possible. Your wheels need to be on the row markings on the opposite side of the road before you start your turn. Entering a row on an angle is slow, blocks the roadway and increases the chances of hitting containers. Check yourself. Just like driving on the road, the attitude a driver has can affect many other vehicles. Fast, aggressive driving is counterproductive, annoying and dangerous. Take a defensive approach to driving. Be patient when encountering traffic and remember that it's not a race. Exercise extreme caution in lanes 1 and 3 when under the crane. Room is tight and there are people on the ground. Travel very slowly and keep a good lookout. If you're not happy with the situation, contact your foreman. Never forget that you're working in an environment that has heavy machinery with often limited stability operating at speed. Straddles have significant blind spots and can take some time to stop, especially when loaded. If there's a collision, there's a good chance of serious damage with injury to people. Always keep a good lookout and be prepared to stop. Drive at an appropriate speed and respect other drivers.